Hello everyone, and welcome to this discussion, 3PL Leaders Respond to the COVID-19 Crisis. My name is David Gonzalez. I'm a VP Analyst here at Gartner, and I'm very, very pleased to be joined today by two of the world's leading 3PL organizations. We have Mohammed Esa, the SVP for Global Business Development from Agility Logistics. We have Rainer Kiefer, EVP Global Sales at DB Schenker, and Rüdiger Vetter, Head of Global Marketing at DB Schenker as well. What we'd like to cover on this panel really is the 3PL's response to COVID-19. I think it's fair to say we're in unprecedented times. The level of disruption caused by COVID-19 is significant. Various different countries around the world are taking various measures, not only to protect their citizens, but really to stop, or try and stop at least, the expansion of this COVID-19 across various different territories. As Gartner, we've certainly seen a significant amount of inquiries increase from our shipper community as organizations try to respond to COVID-19. The pressures on logistics networks, I think, are unprecedented, and a lot of organizations around the world are trying to respond as best they can and cope with the pressures on their various different logistics networks. What we wanted to do today is really hear from two of the world's leading 3PL organizations. So many shippers rely on their 3PL partners, and 3PLs are equally being challenged by COVID-19. And what we wanted to do is to hear both from Agility Logistics and DB Schenker on how they're trying to cope with COVID-19, both from their own organizational perspectives, but how they're trying to support their shippers and their customers through the process as well. So I'm very, very pleased to be joined by Mohammed, by Rainer, and by Rudi as well. So let me move to the questions, and maybe we can start to hear from the panel. I'll just put the slide up here in terms of frequently asked questions, and we'll go through these, and we'll ask Mohammed, Rainer, and Rudi to comment as we go through each one. The way that we've structured these questions is really what the organizations are doing to support customers today. So what's the immediate response to this growing crisis? How the organizations are preparing for the aftermath of COVID-19, or coronavirus as it's also commonly known, and then maybe sharing their views on how they think this is going to maybe fundamentally shift thinking around logistics, because we've had some interesting things from the shipper community, and I wanted to take the opportunity to share those views with both Agility and DB Schenker, and just get a sense from them as to how they see maybe COVID-19 significantly changing the way that we do logistics in the future. So let me start with really the immediate response. We're in the eye of the storm. It seems that in some countries it's likely to get worse before it gets better. So let me start by maybe asking Mohammed, if I may, what types of capacity constraints are you seeing from an Agility Logistics perspective when it comes to the air and ocean freight markets?
Thank you, David. I think, as you rightly pointed out, first of all, we're in unprecedented territory, and the situation it's highly fluid, it's fast changing, and we see a few themes. First of all, we see this disruption moving from east to west, and we saw, we're still seeing big impact in Asia for the first quarter, from late January until, late last week. Production and cargo movements in countries like China, South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, and even other Asian markets were significantly down. And while production in China is probably creeping up back around, sort of 60% territory as of mid-March, as these factory restarts are taking place every day, we're still seeing, a few key themes as far as air and ocean capacity constraints are concerned. And with air, the situation really started with intra-Asia. I think it was first impacted because of the heavy reliance on belly capacity there within intra-Asia. So we saw rates spiraling. We saw a huge shortage of capacity, and even non-Asian freight carriers, were operating and adding capacity into that market. The cargo capacity constraints are continuing with China, both outbound and inbound. Flight cancellations, as an example, that have been caused by a drop in demand as well as with freighters, is removing, on an average, we think about 6,000 tons of capacity every day. And the daily cargo capacity is down about 37% in February, for example, versus the same period last year. What we're also seeing is charter prices are rapidly increasing because there's an increasing demand for air charters. And so all of this combined, is making things extremely volatile. Now, what's happening now, of course, with the new measures that have been announced in the U.S. today, we have to see what the impact on that is for the transatlantic sector between the U.S. and Europe. And so that's the situation with air. If I move on to ocean very quickly, I think we saw a huge amount of blank sailings, and while blank sailings are have been the norm during Chinese New Year period, what we saw this year was unprecedented in terms of the increase. So almost, if I look at a lane like Asia to Northern Europe, almost 45% of the scheduled departures were withdrawn. And so with all of those blank sailings, what's happened is that there's a very huge imbalance in equipment. And we're finding, that the market in Europe, for example, is extremely challenging to get reefer capacity or even dry capacity containers because you've got this imbalance and you've got this shortage of containers in Europe. And then, of course, you have that combined with the general nervousness around the market. So these are the air and ocean capacity constraints and the main themes that we're seeing.
Great, thank you, Mohammed. I guess you share some of that, DB Schenker, Rainer, Rudy. Would you agree with that?
Sure. Probably let me start, David. Thanks for having Schenker here at the table at these exceptional times, and for Gartner for providing a stage where we hopefully can help the shippers keep the supply chain afloat. Underlining everything Mohammed said, I think on air, it was already mentioned the cancellation of passenger flights killing the belly capacity is one driver, of course. Another driver also to be mentioned is the quarantine restriction for flight crews that are requiring crew members to return immediately. So we are flying double crews. So these two drivers, the PAX flights going down and the quarantine restrictions are there to stay and drive, so to say, the supply side, and will continue to do so. And also in terms of routing, that has huge impact now, the U.S. putting up the quarantine situation. So on the ocean, the bottleneck now is Europe, with a slow ramp up of production in China, causing the imbalance. Bottleneck from Europe, with roll pools now in the ports. On a positive note, the China trucking is coming back to normal. So that is a very nice development I'd just like to add. Probably, capacity on land, if I mentioned that briefly in Europe, we are facing a very changing environment just this week in Europe. But fortunately there, Schenker, we have, I think, the most resilient land network with 430 terminals in 36 countries that allows us to drive a lot of contingencies. And so we are very fortunate there.
Great. Thank you for that. So just sort of, continuing on that sort of thought, Rainer. So how are you helping shippers? What advice are you giving your customers? Given that we are, almost in the eye of the storm, if you like. So what practical advice would you say that DB Schenker is sharing with your customers, maybe to get through the immediate crisis?
Yeah, I think really the 2 points you're making, how Schenker helps the shippers. On the very high level, Schenker makes capacity happen and we move the freight, but to be specific, we are every day, working on our land network, that is with the 430 branches, continuous optimization and contingency planning. Also to be specific, alternative routings, the whole 9 yards, all including also a rail in and out of China, charter capacity. In ocean, we offer a premium product with guaranteed uplifts, specific customer solutions. But I think what is probably the most important thing is that we give full transparency in regular updates and very high degree of granularity by product and region to the customers, have video conference with the customers. So we have all hands on deck 24/7 across the globe, starting from the board, but absolutely more important with the operators at the front line. And the advice to our customers is walk with us shoulder on shoulder through these exceptional situations. And our advice, Schenker's advice to you, the customers, help us to help you. And you help us by early communication of precise requirements. And for example, in air, reach out to us with a specific ask. We need to ship 7 tons on Tuesday, March 18th, from A to B. Please avoid very generic requests like, oh, give me an indication how much is 1 kilo from Germany to China over the next whatever weeks. Then it's hard to help. And also what we ask our customers, be clear on the priority of the cargo and what can be deferred. Also in air, my recommendation is consider, if you're a major shipper, deployment of dedicated charter capacity. And also Schenker and the customer, in this situation, we are in the same boat. We need and practice a collaborative attitude. Daily dialogues, very, very close to the customers. Kind of in overcapacity times, what we see, of course, top-down instructions. That is massively backfiring in these days. So we need a collaborative approach, and Schenker will make everything then happen.
Yeah, and I think that collaboration is something that we hear from the shipper community as well. A recognition that if they collaborate and they're more transparent with their service partners, the more likely they are to succeed. And I'm assuming that you're probably hearing something similar at Agility, Mohammed.
Yes, absolutely, David. I think at Agility we have, well, first of all, how are we helping them? So I think the point made earlier, it's about collaboration and communication. We are actively engaged every single day, multiple times a day. We have calls, meetings, discussions with our customers. We're part of contingency planning task forces that they have put into place as well, and staying very, very close to their needs and understanding, how is production eventually ramping up, in particular areas, and what does that mean for their demand? What will that mean for solutions that they're going to need in the not just today, but so on a tactical basis. We're providing, whether it's spot quotes, whether it's onboard couriers, whether it's hand carry shipments and charter requests and so on, but also on a 2, 3, 4 week rolling sort of forecast, demand planning. What's going on. What are they hearing from their, because the supply chain teams that we deal with are also on the receiving end of a lot of pressure and demand from, their internal teams, from their sales and marketing teams, and from their business units. So it's a multi-way communication channel that needs to remain open. On our website, we're updating sometimes multiple times a day in minute detail by province, by region in China, for example, what's the trucking capacity, how that's looking, what's going on with the terminals, what's happening in specific areas around government regulations and so on. And we're going to keep doing that. So many of our customers are actually using our website in their internal meetings, to actually look at planning scenarios and so on. So I think the key theme, as has been called out, is collaboration, communication, making sure we are together in this. We face the same pressures, and we're in here together to help support our customers.
I'm interested to know as well. Are you seeing the same collaboration from the carriers then? It's something to both you, Mohammed, and Reina. I mean, do you get the sense that collaboration is also being demonstrated from the airlines, the shipping lines, because you often represent the interests of your customers, and you're having then to sort of communicate that to the carriers that physically move the product from A to B. Do you get a sense of same collaboration coming from the carrier community? And maybe we'll go with your comments first, Reina, on that question.
Sure. No, we are very close and collaboratively now with our carriers. Otherwise, we couldn't steer through that. I think we are fortunate in air that we have a dedicated and very experienced charter team, and we have 24/7 coverage there with follow the sun principle. And we are also privileged that we have a very exceptional position with the airlines. So with the massive footprint we have already in regular times, I think there's no other way to go collaborative, but in these days even more so. Or the notion we have with all major players a long-term partnership, and in land it's basically our own unique network that we can steer and drive and even expand now in this crisis time. But as Mohammed said, although Schenker, it is basically one big chain that now has to work collaboratively, and I think the people in the toughest spot are the supply chain managers in our customers' setups, and we are dedicated to help however we can, but it has to go from their sales and customers through the supply chain to the 3PLs, to the carrier. I mean, over communication and collaboration is, I think, the required phrase for these days.
Yeah, they certainly seem to be consistent themes. Just let me ask you about your own organizations then. And maybe coming to you, Mohammed, are you seeing maybe changing practices within agility to cope with this? We've heard companies encouraging their employees to work from home. Remote working is one of the tactics to try and stem the spread of COVID-19. I think before we started this recording, you mentioned to me that if it was business as usual, you'd probably be on a plane heading somewhere. That's part of your job at Agility. But how are you coping within the Agility organization with COVID-19 yourselves?
So I think David, what's important, I think, is we all play our role in trying to contain and do our bit, based on advice from the government, based on what the geographies that we're in, right? So we have within Agility, we have a task force, a global task force that is responsible for all the decisions that are being made on a daily basis around, how we operate as a company in this crisis. And some of the things we have put into place, for example, our business continuity plans in every single location of ours. Obviously, this rapid response team is doing the global coordination, but people come, very, very important. They're first. So we emphasize the safety of our people. We've canceled, all our internal meetings, moved them to online meetings. International travel is curtailed. And we've put into place a lot of enhanced health and safety measures. We're also helping our employees work from home, and in many markets that's not even an option. It's a large proportion of them that are now working from home. So thankfully we are equipped from an IT perspective to allow that to happen. And I think most employees we can have them work from home. So obviously, I think this is very important for us as a company is to manage. We're responsible for our people and for the community that we're in.
Mm.
Yeah. It's similar with you, Rainer, I guess, in terms of having to respond to the change in situation.
Yeah. So we have a daily situation room running right with the CEO every day, and also very clear goals that it's safety first of everyone in the supply chain, be it our people, shipper side, or our carrier partners, and then secondly to keep the supply chains afloat. And we have very extensive business continuity plans now in place. One example is the work from home, and where we have various setups currently running. We are splitting the workforce in one area, for example, into 14-day shifts, one in the office, one working from home. So thanks that we heard before that the crisis was rolling from east to west, and being a global provider in more than 100 countries. I mean, we could see it coming and fortunately make use of the time to prepare these contingency plans. Yeah.
Oh, okay, good. Let me move on because I'm interested to get your view on the when we return to some sense of normality. We're referring to this as the aftermath of coronavirus, if you like. Because I think some shippers are telling us that they are already anticipating capacity constraints. They're anticipating significant shift in pricing as a result of those capacity constraints. So let me ask you first of all, what are or how are you preparing sort of to deal with that aftermath, assuming there are capacity constraints? How and maybe I'll come to you first on this one, Rainer. How would you say DB Schenker is positioning to help its customers for maybe that spike in demand that comes once we return to some sense of normality?
Thanks, David. It picks up on a couple of themes we mentioned. I think our customers, I think the key ask is align early and proactively with the Schenker staff in order to get them to, once the production is up and ready again, to move the freight. So early proactive alignment is key. The more precise, of course, the shipping requirements, the better. Clear priorities, signals where people will be flexible is helpful. And then also, which is a change in mentality, close offers fast. I mean, the expiry date of all these offers is very short because that is like the nature of the changing environment. So, and for air, the faster you can commit to space, the better for the shipper. I think another thing, if production is coming back, is avoid double bookings in order to secure the shippers. I mean, that's sorted out, and that is typically backfiring, not on our end, but from the carrier side. So please align early in order to keep rolling the supply chain once the production is back.
Yeah. And how about in agility, Mohammed? How are you advising sort of customers, or how are you preparing for what may be anticipated to be significant sort of demands on capacity once we do return to that normality?
Yeah, I think, David, in our case as well with agility, we think that eventually there is considerable pent-up demand, and as we just mentioned earlier, with production returning to close to 100%, we think probably by the end of March, there is going to be tremendous pressure on our customers and on us, to meet their needs. So what we're preparing for various scenarios, we've already started planning with very specific customers on dates, on times for, things like charters, round the world charters, round trip charters. And I think we need to be prepared for a big modal shift as well, because there's going to be maybe some emergency shipments that need to go. So there'll be some ocean to air conversions. I think, what was mentioned earlier, some alternative solutions will also need to be deployed. So things like rail, sea, air, sea. The key point being, if we can work with our customers and we can have better forecasts and more detailed forecasts with more commitments, then I think we can react in a much more positive way as well, and take this up a little bit proactively.
Yeah, and are you seeing any particular industries in a better place, or any sort of characteristic from an organization on the shipper side that you might say, well, this type of company might fare better in moving their product more effectively once we return to that sense of normality? I mean, are there any characteristics you can call out, or any specific vertical industry you might say feels a little better prepared than others?
Well, personally, I think what we've seen is, very customer-centric companies. For example, some of the ones in the retail sector, for whom sales is so critical, and they're more customer-centric. I see them reacting much more positively in a more a bit more detail, and able to make commitments, able to plan, and this is where I think that we do see some trends where the more customer-centric companies are, of course, reacting in a different way from maybe others.
How about you, Raina? Are you seeing any kind of vertical industry stand out for you in terms of either better preparedness for this, or to maybe return to normality quicker than other industries?
I think the driving factors for being prepared is, the more you have a solid forecast in place, the more you have your act together in terms of priorities, willingness to commit early, have a culture to non-bureaucratic culture, and all the shippers that value quality and reliability and have done so in the past are better prepared, clearly. And that typically then, if you pull it up into an industry perspective, clearly shippers that have a global setup rather than a local setup are easier, but also then it's how much just in time, how thin have you sliced your supply chain. That is putting a lot of pressure on our customers there. And then, and by that, of course, electronics customers have pumped a global supply chain with a very clear planning in the past. So they are having the hands on deck in terms of the global reach, but also the automotive industry now is very special with their just-in-time and slim supply chains, where we are helping them in particular to steer through. Healthcare, yet again, has a different need. Our all goal ultimately is help the ultimate customers. And in this situation, we need to support the health systems. So that is a top priority. And fortunately, also they are running very global supply chains with good transparencies and are in a better shape than other more localized customers.
Great, thank you for that. So now let me move on to the sort of this kind of final section of the asking you to maybe be a little bit sort of speculative, or try to predict the future, as I'm sure you get from your own customers within the shipper community as analysts. We're often asked to try and predict what's going to happen in the future. So let me start just by asking you to, do you have a view as to when we're likely to start recovering from COVID-19? I know it's going to be very dependent on the spread of the virus itself, but some organizations are talking, by the summer, maybe by the end of the year, before we start to approach, sort of holiday peak at the end of 2020. Is there any view from either Agility or Schenker on when we're likely to see the end of this disruption, or is it sort of impossible to even predict? Maybe I'll come to you first, Mohammed, if I may.
Sure. Look, I think it's very difficult to predict. So first of all, the long-term economic impact of the virus remains to be seen, right? We don't know yet how much it will dampen trade volumes, global GDP. We don't know what sort of stimulus measures governments will put into place to counteract any downturn, by generating fresh, economic activity or putting in measures that address the needs of affected workers, right? Because remember, there's a whole lot of people that, don't have full-time regular jobs, and there's a gig economy. There are many people who work part-time, who are self-employed. For us as a company, Agility, we remain hopeful. We remain hopeful that this disruption, will be a slowdown as opposed to a global recession, right? We hope that this is the case, and we have to ensure business continuity. So, if we look tactically right now, what's happening, even if nothing changes, we know, for example, ocean freight for the next 4 to 6 weeks out of Europe, it's very difficult to get capacity. But if the U.S. and Europe have a big impact in terms of a consumer demand, then I think the disruption will go longer. If for example there's a limited impact in the U.S. and Europe and consumer demand picks back up, then I think we'll come back to recovery very quickly. So I think there are so many scenarios. It's very difficult to predict exactly what's going to happen. Obviously, what's important in this time is to, as we've said a few times on this call now, is to stay really close, collaborate. Even more important to communicate clearly with transparency, and have that partnership with our clients to make sure that as things are changing, you were able to respond, react, and even be proactive.
Thank you, Rainer, and your view.
Yeah, probably just commenting on the supply side. I mean, the demand side is to be seen where the economy goes, but on the logistics supply side, I think in air, it is to me evident that passenger travel will be down for a long time. So the belly space will be out of the market for a long time. Into the summer, definitely. I see already now people delaying, canceling the summer plans. That will impact the supply side. In ocean, it's just been that I think ex-Asia, that is very fast back to normal production. I'm talking end of April. Ex-Europe, that's just, I mean, that's very much crystal ball. It's just starting here on the supply side. We don't know how the demand will develop, but probably a dampening demand will even help the situation. On land in Europe, with our large network of 430 terminals, there we are very confident that we can cover a lot of eventualities. I mean, with 430 terminals, you have almost infinite possibilities to drive contingencies if certain areas potentially hit. So that's on the supply side. The demand side, that is a big question currently. And where is the GDP going?
Yeah, that's the tougher piece, I guess, to predict with any sort of sense of accuracy. Let me ask you this. I don't know whether you feel comfortable answering this, or but I'm going to ask it anyway. We've seen some sort of governments, financial institutions recognizing the economic impact that COVID-19 is likely to have. Maybe try to alleviate some of those pressures on organizations and individuals across society as well. Do you think it would be fair for shippers to expect a moratorium on price increases coming out of COVID-19, or is it very much, market forces will dictate pricing levels? I mean, is there a view on that? Maybe come to you first, Rainer.
Well, I think we in Schenker, we are committed to move the freight, and that even in these days with excellent quality at an appropriate price. I think if you go one level up, I think the big question really again is how do we keep our people, our nations healthy and safe? And there it's the question, I mean, are price restrictions at some point in time conceivable? And then on the transport element within consumer prices, that is actually, if you break it down, quite a surprisingly small piece. If you buy whatever, a bottle of a drink, and the transport cost element is rather slim in that. So I think it's I think what we need to look out first and foremost is to keep people safe, and then also be able to nurture them. And I think talking about prices, it's at that level first, and then it trickles down the alley. But in terms of prices, yes, we move the freight. We do everything to deliver the quality at an appropriate price.
Okay. That's an incredibly diplomatic answer. Thank you for that. So let me ask Mohammed then. I mean, and some shippers are sort of calling for cooperation on the part of carriers and 3PL partners, not to see this as an opportunity to hike or increase prices unreasonably. You think that's a fair request from the shipper community? I mean, is that something that you think sort of carriers should really consider?
I think, David, it's a very important and a valid point. I mean, look, we as a third-party logistics company and and a freight forwarder, we don't own those assets. The airlines or the shipping lines do, and the prices. If you look at the prices today, they are based on supply and demand, and we're trying our best to mitigate price increases towards our customers. We're obviously working very hard with the carriers, with particularly for accounts that are regular, that we know, that we've had long-term relationships with. We're trying to help mitigate those price increases. We're trying to negotiate surcharges. We're trying to negotiate all of this to keep to keep some reason within that. And I think at the end of the day, our customers are very justified in asking, can something be done, from an airline and a shipping line side? Now, to the point made earlier, though, as a net result to the consumer, is the transport price really a game changer in terms of changing the price of a product on the shelf, and how much does it impact? That's a much smaller impact, I think. If you look at the average retail product that's out there. Or even a life sciences product. So I think that the cost of the transport is still a very, very small fraction of the overall price to the consumer. So our government's going to do something about protecting our consumers. I think that's the first priority. And then what is the downstream effect of that on supply, and what is the downstream effect on that on companies that are relying on supply chains not having tripled or quadrupled their prices is something that needs to be reviewed, considered, and obviously acted upon if it ultimately impacts consumer pricing in a big way.
Yeah. So it's a fair comments from both of you. Thank you. So let me move to this last question now, and I think this is interesting because disruptions will happen. I mean, we're talking about COVID-19. I think we all in the industry for a few years. We probably remember SARS and bird flu and other sort of economic disruptions that have occurred over a period of time. And sometimes supply chains, logistics networks, they may be very good at responding to the immediate disruption, but maybe some aren't very good at learning from past experiences and maybe changing sort of things going forward. So what we've heard from shippers is that maybe this will be the crisis or the disruption that leads to fundamental change. Some companies are talking about nearshoring. Some companies are talking about not being overly reliant on single countries for the bulk of their manufacturing. Various different things that, if those organizations follow through, that will fundamentally change maybe the way that we design or that we operate logistics networks? I mean, what's the view from, maybe coming to you first, Mohammed, what's the view from Agility in terms of the long-term, maybe fundamental change that you might predict or you might see being applied to global logistics?
So in the medium to long term, I think you're right. We may see some more fundamental shifts, but I don't think that COVID-19 would be the sole reason for it. So if we think back to what was happening in the fourth quarter of last year, with the trade dispute escalations that was happening between U.S. and China and so on, at that time already, we experienced discussions with clients where they were looking to move production away from China to diversify a bit. Some of the Southeast Asian economies were benefiting from that already. So that trend, I think, was already on the move towards the fourth quarter of last year. That's likely to continue, I think. And will there be some more nearshoring? Yes, possibly. There will be some more nearshoring. But, we have to, again, go back to a comment that was made earlier, which was, most companies today work on, short, predicted lead times, just-in-time supply chains, and that's clearly, because of an economic benefit. And ultimately, I think the economic benefits will outweigh, people will put contingencies and think about contingencies and risks and so on, but ultimately the economic benefits will be the ones that determine where and how they manufacture products and move products. So I think there will be some changes. Will it be dramatic? I don't think so.
Okay, it's interesting. Let me come to you with that, Rainer. Just to add, before you give your view, maybe you can comment on this as well. One shipper said to me that the response to this disruption may lead to additional buffering in inventories across various different networks, which isn't necessarily a good thing to do either. But what would the view from you, Rainer, and DB Schenker be?
Yeah, thanks, David. I think COVID is actually an acceleration of what we've seen already in the trade war last year. So we see a reduction of risk and shippers increasingly spreading their eggs across multiple baskets. And to be very specific, I think in terms of production, spreading the eggs is spreading it across multiple continents. So less about nearshoring, but more about thinking through having multiple locations running. For transportation, we already now see also more conscious supplier development. So in the past couple of days, I had independently a couple of customers commenting how glad they are that they changed a while ago from a cheap Charlie to a Schenker. So on production resilience, in terms of all the transportation providers, I think the response on inventories, we see that ongoing, but that is only a short-term remedy. I think that gives security. That's very fast to switch on. In the already medium term, and we, as I said, already driven by the trade war, we saw the development already ongoing towards a resilient production setup, towards a partnership and more stable setup with transportation suppliers.
Very good. I like that term, Rainer, cheap Charlie logistics. I'm not sure that they're one that we've included in our global magic quadrant this year, but I'll have to keep an eye out for them.
Yeah.
But no, that's tremendous, and I know that it was a huge commitment for all of you to dedicate time this morning to this panel discussion. I think what I heard, if I can summarize from both of you, is communication and collaboration really between customers and their 3PL partners. And I think if you have that collaboration spirit and you keep the lines of communication open, the companies that do that will sort of come out of COVID-19 maybe in a little bit better shape than some others that don't have that sort of collaborative spirit. But I just really want to say thank you very much to Rainer, to Rudy from DB Schenker, to Mohammed from Agility Logistics. Thanks again, gentlemen. Some tremendous insights here.